So my name is Justina, and today we are going to talk about something that's often seen as very positive, and in my opinion, it can be quietly harmful. And I'm talking about toxic motivation, the kind of motivation that tells you just push harder, no excuses. If you really want it, you'd make it happen. Rest is for the weak. Everyone else is managing. Why can't you? This kind of motivation is everywhere in workplaces, on social media, or even in self help culture. And while it's often prized, it can disconnect us from ourselves. So, if you've ever felt guilty for resting, ashamed for struggling, or like you're never doing enough, this episode is for you. So, take a deep breath and let's begin. So, let's talk about what toxic motivation really is. So, toxic motivation is not motivation rooted in growth, it's motivation rooted in pressure. So, it ignores your capacity, your nervous system, your mental health, your emotional state, and your humanity. Toxic motivation says, keep going no matter what, and healthy motivation asks what's sustainable for me. The difference matters because motivation that ignores limits eventually leads to burnout, not success. So, in many workplaces, toxic motivation is normalized. It can sound like we are all tired. That's just part of the job. You should be grateful to even be here. Everyone else is managing. We're like family here, but there's no boundaries respected. Or even something like, if you cared more, you'd stayed late. Overworking becomes a badge of honor, exhaustion becomes proof of commitment, and burnout becomes invisible until someone breaks. So you may feel pressure to skip breaks, answer emails outside of work hours, um, stay late without recognition, prove your worth constantly, or even suppress stress to appear capable. And when you struggle, it's framed as personal failure, not a systematic problem. And this often creates environments where people survive but don't feel safe. So there was a time when I genuinely believed that being exhausted meant I was doing something right. I worked in an environment where pushing past limits was normal, where staying late wasn't questioned, where being available all the time was silently expected. And at first, it felt validating, and being busy felt like being needed, being tired felt like being committed. But over time, I noticed something changing. I wasn't just tired, I was constantly tense. I started I started dreading emails. I felt guilty taking breaks. Even rest didn't feel resentful anymore. What stayed with me the most wasn't the workload, it was the feeling that slowing down meant failing. Then needing rest meant I wasn't strong enough. And I remember realizing this isn't motivation, this is pressure disguised as dedication. That moment changed how I see work and myself. I also noticed how much social media influenced the way I pushed myself. I see people waking up at 5 a.m. doing more, achieving more, posting about discipline and hustle, and without realizing it, I started questioning my own pace. Even on days when I was already doing a lot, it felt like it wasn't enough. And what I didn't see was what we rarely see was the full picture. The support systems, the burnout, the cost behind the consistency. I had to consciously step back and ask myself, is this inspiring me or is this making me feel like I'm constantly behind? That question alone helped me change my relationship with motivation online. And at some point, I realized something important. Motivation that constantly comes with guilt, fear, or self criticism isn't helping me grow. It's teaching me to ignore myself. And that's where I knew I needed a different definition of motivation, one that supports me instead of draining me. We are constantly shown early mornings, packed schedules, productivity routines, 24/7 grind mentalities, success stories without context, but you can rarely see the exhaustion, the support system, the privilege, the failed attempts, or mental health struggles. So comparison kicks in. You start thinking, if they can't do it, why can't I? Maybe I'm just lazy. Maybe I'm not disciplined enough. Social media often rewards performance, not the truth. Toxic motivation often sells the idea that your worth is tied to how much you produce, and that belief is deeply harmful. So, when I was younger, I used to watch YouTube a lot, and I used to see a lot of girls waking up at like 5 a.m. and going to the gym or like exercising and then doing like stuff that they had on their to-do list, and the to-do list was usually quite long. And I remember I was actually comparing myself to them quite a lot because I thought that's like the way to live when you want to be successful. And then when I got older, I realized that it's actually not realistic because many people don't live that way. Um, so I think social media has a big impact on toxic motivation culture because a lot of young people watch celebrities or like other famous influencers, and they think that the way they live is the real life. But they don't realize that a lot of people just don't live that way. So, toxic motivation feels appealing because it offers certainty. It gives clear rules, like work harder, sleep less, push through, or ignore discomfort. It promises control in an uncertain world. And for people who grew up with pressure, high expectations, or conditional approval, this messaging feels familiar. But familiar doesn't mean healthy. Motivation based on fear keeps you moving, but it doesn't let you rest. Living under toxic motivation has consequences. Over time, you might experience chronic stress, emotional numbness, anxiety, irritability, loss of creativity, resentment, or even burnout. You may stop listening to your body. You may ignore warning signs. You may feel guilty for slowing down, even when you need it. And eventually, your body or your mind will force a pause. Rest ignored becomes burnout demanded. So let's compare the toxic motivation to healthy motivation. So, healthy motivation respects your limits, adapts to your seasons, allows rest, includes self compassion, and supports long term growth. And toxic motivation demands constant output, it shames rest, it ignores context, and it prioritizes results over well being. Healthy motivation asks what supports me, and toxic motivation demands what more can you give. One builds sustainability, and the other drains it. So let's talk about how can you protect yourself from toxic motivation. So you don't need to reject ambition. You need to redefine it. So, the first thing you need to do is to question the message you consume. So, repeated exposure to always on messaging trains your nervous system to stay in a stress mode. Not all motivation is neutral, some of it conditions anxiety. The second thing you need to do is to separate worth from productivity. Research constantly shows that chronic overwork reduces performance over time. Burnout people don't work better. They work slower with less clarity and creativity. The third thing you need to do is to listen to your nervous system. Burnout is not a mindset problem. It's a psychological response to prolonged stress without recovery. Rest is not laziness, it's biological maintenance. And the fourth thing you need to do is to redefine success personally. Studies on job satisfaction shows that meaning and autonomy matter more than constant achievements. A quiet, regulated life can be more successful than visibly busy one. And the last thing you need to do is to allow seasons of slowness. So every system, including the human one, requires cycles of effort and recovery. Ignoring this leads to breakdown, not growth. Rest is not falling behind, it's recabilitation. If toxic motivation has shaped how you treat yourself, it doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're being taught that pushing is safer than pausing. But growth doesn't require suffering, success doesn't require burnout, and motivation doesn't need to hurt. You are allowed to work with yourself and not against yourself. So, as usual, I have journal questions for you. So, open your journals and write them down, and you can answer them whenever you want. And you don't have to share your answers with anyone. Um, just keep it to yourself if you want to. So, the first question is, where do I notice toxic motivation in my life? The second question is, how does pushing past my limits affects me? And the third and last question is, what does healthy motivation look like for me? And remember to answer them honestly, and if you don't want to, don't share your answers with anyone. I also have the usual action steps for you. So I want you to ask yourself before pushing, is this coming from a fear or care? And I also want you to choose one moment to rest without guilt. The usual affirmation for you to write down in your journal is, my worth is not measured by my productivity. And as we come to the end of this episode, I want you to remember this. You don't need to burn yourself out to prove your value. You don't need to keep up to be enough. And you don't need toxic motivation to build a meaningful life. Thank you for being here. If this episode resonated with you, feel free to share it with someone who may need it. And don't forget to say hi on my Instagram at positive.mindset.adventures. So until next time, take care of yourself, honor your limits, and keep choosing what feels true. Thank you for listening once again. See you and bye.